Hi guys, thank you so much for taking interest into these web development courses. So in this lesson, we're going to look at an introduction to web development. So these are some of the things that you learn in this lesson. So we have on the first list how websites work. So we're just going to look at some basic um, ways in which websites work. Then we look at some of the best web practices that you can follow as you develop your own websites. Also look at responsive web design, which is something that's very important when it comes to developing and designing your own websites. Then lastly, we look at the basics of UI and UX design, right? So because these lessons are mainly focused on web development, we won't dive deeper into what UI and UX is, but you will have a good understanding of what UI and UX design is, and you can start your journey from there. All right. So the first one being how websites work. So here we have an illustration that shows you how websites work. Okay, so before we even get to writing our own code in designing these websites, we need to understand how they work. Okay, so mainly when it comes to how websites work, we have three components that we need to understand. Okay, so this person that you are seeing seated in front of a computer, we call this the client side. Okay, this is the client side. So this cloud here is an illustration of your internet provider, your network provider. Okay, then we have the server. Okay, so this is the web server that gets to host your the files for your website. Okay, so now looking at this illustration, we're able to see that we have web pages and graphic files which are sent to the server, then they are sent back to the client. Okay, so in other scenarios, you find that we have a third component, which is the database, the backend. Okay, so when you are dealing with a website that has got data coming from a database or has got media files coming from a cloud storage, it will come either from the cloud storage or a database and send that information to the web server, which then sends the information to the client side, and that's how a user or you yourself get to see the content on the website that you are either designing or the website that the client is looking at. Okay, so here there's a statement that says the browser sends an HTTP request message to the server. Okay, so now how does this HTTP request go to the server, right? So we'll look at an example. Okay, so we'll just look at an example of how we can send that request. Okay, right, so go and visit Google, right? So whenever you type www.google.com, then you click enter, right? What we've just done is that in seconds, right, we've sent a request to the Google server, then the server has responded with a response, which is the Google website, right? Now, when you're looking at it like this, you might not see the actual files and images, but you're able to see how that information that we've received has been displayed in the browser, right? So here on top there, on the top right corner, you're able to see the profile, right? So if you are logged in into Google, you'll be able to see your own profile picture there, right? Then you're able to see all this content, the Google logo, which is an image, the input, you're able to see the text and everything that is on the Google website. Right now, how does this happen, right? So what you can do to see how all this takes place, right? So we just go back. Okay, right click, then we'll inspect, right? So we want to inspect the browser and see what really happens, how we get that information, right? So when you right click and you click on inspect, right, this thing will pop up, and mostly it will be on the elements tab, right? So what you do is you go to the network because we want to see what we're getting. Okay, so we can close this for now. We want to see what will be happening here, what we'll be getting as a feedback, right? As a response. Okay, so let's repeat that again. So we just type www.google.com, right? Like that. Then we send a text. Then here you'll be able to see that a lot of information is loading. So these are the actual files that we are getting back from the Google server, right? So you can see all the details, all the information, right? So it has finished loading and we've received all the information that we need. And this is the profile picture, right? So if we open it like that, you're able to see it here, right? So this is the profile picture that we're getting from the server. So all the information is right here, right? And you are able to see the header, right? So the header has got a request URL which we sent. It has got a request method which is a get method because we sent a request to the server to get this information. We are fetching information from the server, right? So then we've got a response. So this is the information for what we are getting. Okay, the date, the time, and everything, right? We're able to see it there. Okay, so that's how we send a request, then get a response. So the response is coming in with a lot of files, images, and everything coming from the server. Then the browser is able to display it in a manner that is more presentable. Okay, all right. Okay, so that's how websites basically work. Okay, so with a website, you get to have a client, a server, and a database, right? Now, you might design your own website on your computer. Okay, when you design a website on your computer, it only exists on your PC or desktop or whatever device you're using. Now, to give access to that website to other people, whether users or friends or family, so what you can do is you can host your website. Now, what does that mean? Okay, so it means you sending your files or storing your files for that website on another person's server or computer that runs 24/7, right? 24/7. It doesn't switch off. Now, for you, if you're using a laptop or a desktop, maybe there'll be times when you'll be switching off your PC and everything, and people might not access your website, right? So you want to put your files on a server that is consistently running. It doesn't switch off, right? And that's how we get to view certain websites, because they are existing on servers that are running 24/7, and that's where hosting comes in. And I'm sure later on in these lessons we'll get to that. Right, so the second thing that we want to look at in this tutorial is best web practices, right? So these are just principles or rules that you can follow to best develop your websites, right? So the first one is learn and master the principles, not the tools. What does this mean? Okay, so when you are learning these technologies, whether you're learning HTML, you're learning CSS, you're learning JavaScript, you need to make sure that you don't just memorize the syntax, but you deeply understand the principles involved, how everything works and what makes it work. Because information is out there. You can Google whatever information you want at any point and you will easily find the information. But for you to really understand the principles, you need to learn and master them so that you are able to solve any problems or challenges that you face, because you do understand how the principle works, right? So these other things are just tools that we can use. For example, if you get stuck, you can just go on Google, search for an information or an error that you're encountering, and you'll be able to find that solution that you're looking for, because you understand the principle, you understand how the syntax work, you understand how websites work, and you do understand what is involved in the development process, right? Then the second thing is always use small size images to avoid having a slow loading website, right? I'm sure maybe some of us have visited websites where you had to wait for the website to complete loading all the images, right? So now, does it mean that you won't have good quality images? No. there are tools that you can really use that can reduce the size of the image while maintaining its quality, right? So this helps your website to load faster. So whenever you're working, especially when you are developing a site that has a lot of images, it's important that you do reduce the sizes of those images, right? So that whenever a user goes on your platform or your website, they they can easily load those images on your site, right? Then the third one is test the website before deploying it on the internet, right? So this is really crucial, right? So you don't just develop your website, and immediately you finish developing it, you push it on the internet, right? Why is that? Because you might be using, for example, Chrome as your browser, right? But it's not every individual that will be using Chrome as the browser of their choice, right? So they might use Firefox, they might use Opera Mint, they might use different browsers to view that site that you're developing, right? So it's vital that you test your website on different browsers, in different browsers rather, and also on different screen sizes, right? You want to make sure that your website is looking great, whether on mobile, on tablet, on desktop, or laptops, right? So you need to keep that consistency. You need to make sure that your site is what? Responsive, which is something that we'll get into, right? Okay, so the other one is make sure your website is what? Responsive on different screen sizes, which is something that we've from talking about, right? So you need to make sure that your site looks good on different platforms and different screens. Okay. Then the other one is always use good quality images, right? So you don't just want your site to be functional, but you want it to also be looking good and nice, right? It's important because the more good quality it has, the more professional it will look like. Okay, so it's important also to just use good quality images that have got small sizes, right? You can reduce, like we've said, there are tools that you can use to reduce the size of the image without distorting its quality. Okay, then the last one is avoid repeating the same information on your website, right? So this is really important, especially when it comes to search engine optimization, right? Which is again another thing that we'll look um, into deeper when we start looking at search engine optimization itself. Okay, so the reason to this is because when you put your website out there and it has the same information on different pages, the search engines, they go through your sites. So if they find repetitive information on different pages, they will reject those pages and won't show them on their search engine when users are looking for your page. Okay, so it's important that you keep the information as unique as possible on the different pages that your website has. Okay, all right, so let's move on to another one. Okay, so we now come to responsive web design. Okay, now when you start looking at CSS, that's when we'll get deeper into responsive design because we'll be using CSS to create responsive design. Okay, so the first one is responsive design is about using HTML and CSS to automatically resize, hide, shrink, or enlarge a website to make it look good on all devices, whether it be desktops, tablets, and phones, right? Like we've mentioned, we need to make sure that the same website that you are viewing on a mobile phone is looking good on a desktop, a laptop, or a tablet, right? Now, to create a responsive design, there's a tag that we always use, which is this one, right? So by default, if you're using the default boilerplate for HTML, you'll see that this tag will be there. Okay, so this tag just makes sure that the website, the scale of the website, right, the width, the size is always equal to the width of the device that you're using. Okay, now when you now go deeper into like determining the layout and everything and the responsiveness, there is what we call media queries in CSS that you can use to make sure that your site is responsive on all different screen sizes. Okay, now when we start looking at CSS, we'll dive deeper into that and you'll be able to understand. Okay, And the last part, which is just the basics of UI and UX. Okay, so we'll start with the definition and just an understanding of what UI and UX is, right? So now, when it comes to UI, it stands for user interface. It's what the user is able to see. It's what you see when you visit your website or when you're looking at a mobile application, whatever you're able to interact with, the content that you are seeing, that's the UI, the user interface, right? So it might be the colors, the fonts you're looking at, the inputs, the buttons, the video you're watching on a platform or a website. That's the user interface, right? Then when it comes to UX, UX is user experience. It's about how something works. When you click a button, what happens, right? When you click a video, what happens? Does it start playing? Does it take you to a different page? All that interaction that the user gets to have with the site, the experience they get to have, that's the user experience. Okay, so now when it comes to UI design principles, these are just principles, rules that help us, that guide us create great user interfaces, right? And these are just a few of them. There are a number of them, but these are just a few of them that you can follow, and these are user experiences. So I just talk about two here and maybe one here, right? Then you can now dive deeper into this UI UX design if you want to know more about them, right? So I'll talk about the first one, which is just I think we talk about proximity, right? Now proximity is about putting together similar content, right? So I'm sure you visited a site where, for example, it had maybe a title and it had maybe contact details, right? So you don't want to put the title of a site and the contact details together, right? So you'll be able to separate them, right? So even here, the illustration is showing you that here there's a small dot and others are here, right? So there's a separation in terms of the content, the differences of the content, okay? So here, if you visit a site and on that site you've got the contact details, it's important that you separate them and they are on their own and the title is on its own, like that, right? So every content that is supposed to be together, bring it closer together. Okay, then the other one is alignment, right? Alignment is important. Okay, alignment is important, it's crucial. Okay, so now what is alignment? Alignment, it's about how you position your items, how you align your items, right? So there are basically three types of alignment. There's center alignment, which is this one. There's also left alignment, where items are aligned on the left side. Then there's also right alignment, right, where the content is aligned on the right side. Okay, so it's important that things are always properly aligned because they look unique, ordered, and they show consistency with your website, right? Then I think the other important one is hierarchy, right? Hierarchy is about showing the most dominant and important thing. And I'm sure you visited a site where the title is so bold and it's so big, and that's maybe the first thing that you saw on the site, right? Then you start seeing these now small paragraphs, headings, and things like that, right? So hierarchy helps you highlight the most important items. It's not always a paragraph, it can be a video, it can be an image, it can be a shape, right? So whatever you want the user to focus on most, that's the most dominant thing, right? So that gets to talk about hierarchy, right? So I think we've talked much on this one. You can look at other principles on your own as well and just try to understand them, right? Then on the user experience, I think the major one that I want to talk about is accessibility, right? Your site needs to be accessible by everyone, right? So when you develop a site, you need to make sure that people are able to access it, right? If I'm using a phone and you developed it on a desktop application, on a desktop, right, I need to make sure that I'm able to access it on my mobile phone as well, right? If someone is using a laptop or a tablet, they need to access it as well, right? So it's important that people are able to access your platform on their different devices. If it's a website, right? As long as they've got a browser, they need to be able to type in the domain or the URL of your website and be able to have access to it, right? Aside from that, there are just certain things on your platform, in your website, that people needs to have access to, right? So if I'm using maybe Chrome as my browser and I'm able to view your video that you've put on your site, Another person using maybe Firefox should be able to view the video as well, right? So there is need for accessibility to be implemented as you develop these sites, right? So I think for now we'll end here, and you'll catch me on the next lesson. So thank you for staying up to the last page or slide rather, and I hope you learned one or two things. And don't forget, it's all about implementing what we're learning, right? So go out there and be able to explore more and just implement what you've learned in this lesson.